All right, welcome to another deep dive. Today, we're going to be looking at Steven Bartlett's The Diary of a CEO, The 33 Laws of Business and Life. It's a pretty fascinating book with tons of ideas about success in business and life in general. And we're not just skimming the surface here. We've got notes, highlights, the whole 9 yards.
Yeah, Bartlett doesn't hold back. He really dives into some deep stuff. It's not just like a bunch of random tips. He's got this whole framework for thinking about how to achieve your goals, whether it's in business, personal life, you name it.
Exactly. Okay, so let's start with what he calls pillar this second, the story. Bartlett is a big believer in the power of storytelling, right? And how a good story can persuade people, get them on board with your idea, whatever it might be. He even says useless absurdity will define you more than useful practicalities, which is a pretty bold statement.
Yeah, that one definitely makes you stop and think. And then he backs it up with that story about the slide, right?
Yeah, the giant blue slide. He spent, what was it, like 13,000 pounds on this massive slide for his marketing company's office. At first glance, you might think, okay, that's a little crazy. Maybe not the best use of company funds.
Totally. I mean, you could probably think of a dozen more practical ways to spend that money, especially for a growing business.
Right. But here's the thing. That slide ended up getting them tons of publicity. I mean, it was everywhere. Magazines, newspapers, TV shows, online articles. Everyone was talking about this crazy slide.
It's funny how something so unexpected can just cut through all the noise. In a world where everyone's trying to get your attention, something like that really makes you stand out.
Totally. It was like this instant visual symbol that communicated something about their company culture. It said, we're different. We're not afraid to take risks. We have fun.
And it probably did that way more effectively than like a traditional ad campaign or something. People remember stories.
Absolutely. It's all about making an impact. And that leads perfectly into his next point about the importance of those first 5 seconds. He calls it stop insulting goldfish. Basically, our attention spans are so short these days, thanks to social media and everything else vying for our attention.
It's true. Our brains are like filters now, constantly sorting through all this information, deciding what's worth paying attention to and what's not.
And he uses this example of a YouTuber who gets millions of views. And his secret is that he hooks you in those first few seconds. He throws something out there, a question, a bold statement, something that just grabs your attention and makes you want to keep watching.
It's like he knows he has to bypass that filter in your brain, and he does it by giving you something valuable or intriguing right off the bat.
Exactly. So think about it this way. When you're scrolling through your feed or watching videos online, what makes you stop? It's usually something that sparks your curiosity, right?
Yeah, something that makes you think, wait a minute, what's this about?
So how can you apply that to your own life? When you're giving a presentation, writing an email, even just starting a conversation, are you making the most of those first few seconds?
It's something to think about for sure. Now, let's move on to pillar the third, the philosophy, which is where Bartlett really dives into the beliefs that shape our actions and ultimately determine our success.
Yeah, and he starts by talking about how beliefs are formed and how they can change, which I found really interesting. He mentions this survey where most people think they consciously choose their beliefs, but then he throws in these thought experiments like, imagine a terrorist turning water into wine right in front of you.
Yeah, that one's pretty wild. It makes you think about how even our most deeply held beliefs are often based on the evidence we accept, even if that evidence seems crazy to someone else.
Totally. And he points out that having stubborn beliefs actually helped our ancestors survive. Like, if you were quick to believe there might be a saber-toothed tiger lurking in the bushes, you were more likely to stay alive, even if there wasn't actually one there.
It makes sense from an evolutionary standpoint, right? But the point is, our beliefs aren't set in stone. They can change, even the ones that seem really ingrained.
But the way they change is kind of surprising. It's not always about logic or facts. He talks about how just presenting someone with evidence that contradicts their belief often doesn't work.
Yeah, like flat earthers. They distrust NASA and all these other sources of evidence. It's like they have this whole alternative set of facts that they believe in.
Exactly. It's like our brains are wired to filter information in a way that confirms what we already believe, even if it's not true.
And it's even more interesting that we're more likely to change our beliefs when the new information is something we want to believe. He mentions studies where people were more accepting of positive information about themselves.
Like being told they have genes that make them less likely to get certain diseases, or that other people find them attractive.
Makes sense. We all want to believe good things about ourselves, right?
Yeah, right. And then there's this other fascinating thing he talks about, how deep self-reflection can actually weaken our beliefs. He mentions a study where graduate students were asked to explain exactly how a toilet works.
That sounds familiar. Didn't their confidence and their understanding drop after trying to explain it?
Exactly. It's like when we're forced to really break down and explain our beliefs, we realize how much we don't actually know.
Which can be a good thing, right? It opens us up to new possibilities, new ways of thinking.
Totally. And when it comes to overcoming limiting beliefs, Bartlett says the key is to have new experiences that contradict those beliefs. He calls it first-party evidence.
So, like, instead of just reading about how to overcome your fear of public speaking, you have to actually get up and speak in front of people.
Exactly. The more you expose yourself to something and have positive experiences, the more your brain starts to rewrite that old belief. So if there's something you're scared of or a belief that's holding you back, think about what kind of experience you can create to challenge it. Now, all of this about beliefs ties into another important concept: leaning in to bizarre behavior.
It's like being open to new ideas, even if they seem a little crazy or disruptive at first.
Exactly. And he gives these examples of people who leaned out and ended up missing out big time. Like the CEO of a music store who dismissed digital music, or that guy who predicted the internet would be a fad.
It's easy to get stuck in our ways, especially when we've been successful in the past. But we have to be willing to adapt and embrace new things, even if they challenge our current worldview.
Absolutely. And a big part of leaning in is being humble, admitting that we don't have all the answers and being curious about what's possible. So, what do you think? Are you a lean-in kind of person?
I try to be. It's definitely a skill you have to work on, especially with the world changing so fast.
Okay, moving right along, we've got the ask, don't tell principle. It's all about the power of questions.
Like Ronald Reagan's famous line, "Are you better off than you were 4 years ago?"
Yeah, classic example. And there's actually research that shows asking questions can be more persuasive than just stating facts.
Because it gets people thinking for themselves, right? Instead of just passively receiving information, they have to engage with the question and come to their own conclusion.
Exactly. And this works for personal goals too. Instead of saying, I'm going to eat healthier, you could ask yourself, will I choose a salad instead of fries today?
It's like you're making a conscious decision in that moment, which makes you more likely to follow through.
And then we have the concept of your self-story, the narrative you tell yourself about who you are.
That's so powerful. He uses that example of the boxer, Chris Eubank Jr., who refused to give up in a fight because of the story he had about himself.
It's like he believed he was a fighter, someone who never quits, and that belief carried him through. And on the flip side, we see how negative stereotypes can impact people's beliefs about themselves.
Yeah, like those studies about how stereotypes about swimming ability affect Black people, or how stereotypes about math affect women.
It's really sad how those external narratives can limit what people believe is possible for themselves. But the good news is, we can rewrite our self-stories.
By taking action, right? Proving to ourselves that we're capable of more than we might have thought.
Exactly. So if you're dealing with a negative self-story, think about what you can do to create a new, more empowering one. Now let's talk about habits. Bartlett explains that just trying to break a bad habit usually doesn't work.
You have to address the underlying reward, right?
Exactly. He talks about his dad quitting smoking by switching to lollipops. He's still got that oral fixation, but it was a healthier alternative.
It's about finding a way to satisfy that craving without the negative consequences.
And he also talks about willpower being like a muscle that gets tired.
Yeah, if you try to change too many things at once, you're more likely to burn out.
It's better to focus on 1 or 2 habits at a time and really commit to them. And then, of course, we have the importance of prioritizing health.
That one's huge. It's easy to get caught up in work and everything else and neglect our health.
Bartlett talks about how the pandemic really made him realize how important it is to take care of himself, not just physically, but mentally and emotionally too.
It's like without our health, everything else suffers.
Okay, now let's dive into some of these counterintuitive ideas, starting with the fact that friction can actually create value.
I love the example he gives about the cake mix. Taking out the egg and making people add it back in actually made them value the cake more.
It's like by putting in a little effort, they felt more ownership over it, which made them appreciate it more. And we see this in other places too, like those websites that make you wait while they search for flights or hotels.
Even though it takes longer, it creates the illusion that they're doing more work for you, which makes you trust them more.
Exactly. It's all about perception. And then we have the idea that the frame matters more than the picture. Like how something is presented can totally change how we see it.
The Pepsi challenge is a great example. People preferred Pepsi in blind taste tests, but when they knew it was Coke, they said they liked it better.
It's like the branding and the associations we have with Coke actually influenced how they experienced the taste.
Really makes you think about how much our perceptions are shaped by external factors.
Okay, and finally, we have to talk about fight for the first 5 seconds, which is a core law within the book. You know, it ties back to that idea of grabbing attention right away. He emphasizes this by talking about that really successful YouTuber and how he structures all his videos to hook people in immediately.
And then he has that analogy about Jenny on the side of the road, right?
Exactly. It's like if you can craft a message that resonates with someone who's stressed, distracted, having a bad day, then you can reach anyone. So it's about cutting through the noise and delivering something that truly matters to your audience.
No fluff, just straight to the point.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into Steven Bartlett's book, think about how you can apply these ideas to your own life and work. How can you tell a better story? How can you lean into new ideas? How can you create those first 5 seconds moments that really grab people's attention?
There's a lot to unpack here, but hopefully it's given you some food for thought.
Absolutely. Now, here's a final thought to ponder. What if you intentionally introduced a bit of useless absurdity into your work? Something unexpected, something that makes you stand out from the crowd. How might that change how people perceive you and your work?
That's a great question. It's all about being memorable, right?
Exactly. And that's what this is all about, finding those little things that can make a big difference in how we achieve our goals.
Couldn't agree more. Thanks for this deep dive. I always learn something new from these conversations.
Me too. And thanks to everyone listening. Until next time, keep diving deep.